The waltz died in the middle of a turn. 300 guests stood frozen beneath the glittering chandeliers of Cotte or Ashford House, their jeweled laughter collapsing into stunned silence. Lady Rosalind Fairfax had just contradicted a duke. "With all due respect, Your Grace, you are mistaken." Her voice, clear, steady, and far too loud, cut through the perfumed ballroom like a blade through silk. For one terrible second, no one breathed. The violins faltered. A champagne glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered softly against the marble floor. And then Sebastian Hartwell, Duke of Greystone, slowly turned his head. The movement was unhurried, predatory, his storm-gray eyes fixed upon her across the crowded ballroom with the cold focus of a man unaccustomed to being challenged, least of all by a young lady with no fortune and very little protection in society. The candlelight sharpened the hard planes of his face, a jaw carved from pride, lips pressed into a line that had not smiled in years. Men twice Rosalind's age had lowered their heads beneath that gaze. She did not. Her green eyes held his. Her heart pounded so violently she was certain the entire room must hear it. But she lifted her chin. 1 inch, enough to say everything. "I meant what I said." The air shifted. Something fragile cracked beneath the weight of aristocratic expectation. The Duke took a single step forward, then another. The crowd parted instinctively before him, silk skirts whispering across the marble as London's highest society cleared a path like water before a ship. "Lady Fairfax," he said at last. His voice was low, controlled, dangerously calm. "The entire room now awaits your explanation." It was not a request. It was a challenge. A duel fought not with pistols but with reputation. Rosalind felt her aunt's gloved hand tighten painfully around her arm. "Rosalind," Aunt Agatha whispered urgently, "apologize." She did not. Instead, Rosalind stepped forward. The move sent another ripple through the crowd. "Your factories employ children barely old enough to read," she said, her voice steady though her pulse thundered in her ears. 10 hours a day, sometimes more. A sharp gasp rose from the assembly. "You call it opportunity," she continued quietly. "I call it cruelty dressed as charity." The silence that followed was suffocating. The Duke did not blink. He closed the distance between them with measured steps, boot heels striking marble, each step echoing like a drumbeat through the ballroom. When he stopped before her, they stood close enough that Rosalind could see the immaculate knot of his cravat, the faint shadow along his jaw where evening stubble threatened aristocratic perfection, the candlelight flickering in his eyes. And something else, something she had not expected, pain, deep, ancient, buried beneath ice. "And you," he murmured so softly only she could hear, "believe you understand cruelty better than I do?" For one fleeting moment Rosalind faltered. There was something in his gaze that felt less like anger, and more like a wound that had never healed, but the moment vanished when he straightened and addressed the room. "How fascinating," the Duke said smoothly. His voice carried easily through the ballroom. A moral expert emerging where one least expects to find one. Laughter erupted. Polite, cruel, relieved. Fans fluttered. Whispers began. Rosalind did not lower her eyes. Not when he turned away. Not when the matrons began murmuring behind jeweled fans. Not when Aunt Agatha dragged her from the ballroom in mortified silence. Only once they were inside the carriage, hidden by the darkness of London streets, did Rosalind allow her composure to crack. Her hands trembled. Her breath came unevenly. She had just publicly defied the most feared man in England. And the terrifying truth was, a part of her wanted to do it again. Sebastian Hartwell did not sleep that night. The fire in his library burned low, throwing restless shadows across shelves of leather-bound volumes he had not opened in years. A glass of cognac sat untouched beside him. The great clock in the hall ticked relentlessly, and still he saw her, green eyes blazing beneath the ballroom chandeliers. Fearless, defiant, alive. No one had spoken to him that way in a decade. Not since before the tragedy. Not since before grief had turned his heart to stone. He should have been furious. Instead, something stirred in his chest. Something dangerously close to life. He rose abruptly and walked to the window overlooking the silent gardens. Rain had begun to fall over London. Cold, relentless. Yet all he could think about was the look Lady Rosalind Fairfax had given him. Not fear, not admiration. Truth. And for the first time in 3 years, the Duke of Greystone felt something he had almost forgotten. Curiosity. 2 days later he saw her again, at the Royal Academy of Arts. He told himself it was coincidence. But when Lady Fairfax stood alone before a storm-torn painting by Turner, sunlight spilling through the tall gallery windows onto her quiet profile. Sebastian realized something unsettling. He had come to find her, and when he stepped beside her and said quietly, "Turner understood storms better than most men." Lady Rosalind Fairfax turned to face him, and the storm between them truly began. Rosalind turned sharply. For a brief moment, surprise flickered across her face, quick and unguarded, before composure returned. "Your Grace." Her voice was softer than it had been in the ballroom, but the dignity remained. She made a proper curtsy this time. Sebastian noticed immediately that the gesture was correct in form, yet incomplete in spirit. Her eyes never lowered. Interesting. He stood beside her before the painting, Turner's furious sea swallowing a fragile ship beneath a violent sky. "Storms," Sebastian said calmly, studying the canvas, "reveal what calm waters conceal." Rosalind folded her gloved hands before her. "And sometimes," she replied quietly, "they reveal what men prefer not to see." A faint smile touched his lips. There it was again, that sharp mind, that refusal to retreat.
"You are alone," he observed.
A risky statement for a young lady's reputation. Rosalind glanced around the nearly empty gallery. Morning visitors had not yet arrived in number. "No lady should wander London galleries unescorted," Sebastian continued mildly. "Society has many rules," she said. "Some of them are foolish." He turned toward her. "Most women would apologize for their behavior at Ashford House." "I am not most women." Her answer came too quickly. For a moment silence stretched between them. Then Sebastian said quietly, "No, you are not." The words hung in the air like the first distant thunder of an approaching storm. Rosalind shifted slightly, studying the painting again. "You came to lecture me about propriety?" she asked. "Hardly." He stepped closer, not improperly, but close enough that his voice dropped to something almost private. "I came because you intrigued me." She turned sharply. "I insulted you before half of London. You challenged me. That is not the same." "No," Sebastian said thoughtfully. "It is far more interesting." Rosalind stared at him as if uncertain whether he was mocking her. His expression revealed nothing. The infamous mask of the Duke of Greystone remained perfectly composed. "Why?" she asked slowly. "Does your Grace tolerate such impertinence?" He tilted his head slightly. "Because for 3 years no one has dared offer it." The answer startled her. Something flickered across her face. Curiosity, sympathy, dangerous emotions. Then she asked the question that changed everything. "Why haven't you smiled in 3 years?" Sebastian froze. The gallery seemed to shrink around them. The air grew suddenly cold. "You should choose your questions carefully, Lady Fairfax," he said quietly. "Some wounds are not meant for polite conversation." Rosalind did not retreat. "I lost my father 8 months ago," she said softly. "He died believing he had failed us." Her voice trembled once before steadying again. "So yes, Your Grace, I understand something about invisible wounds." The word struck deeper than she could possibly know. Sebastian studied her for a long moment. The aristocratic mask wavered, just slightly, and beneath it she glimpsed the man who lived behind the title. Then footsteps echoed across the marble floor. "Sebastian!" The sharp feminine voice shattered the fragile moment. Lady Helena Montrose unswept into the gallery in a cloud of pale silk and calculated elegance. The Duke's cousin, ambitious, beautiful, and famously determined to become Duchess of Greystone one day. "How delightful," Helena said sweetly, though her smile barely concealed irritation. "I did not realize you had company." Her gaze lingered on Rosalind with thinly veiled disapproval. Sebastian straightened instantly. The brief glimpse of vulnerability vanished. The Duke returned. Lady Fairfax was sharing her views on Turner. He said coolly. "How enlightening." Helena slipped her arm through his possessively. "We are late for our appointment with the Marquis of Alderborough." Sebastian hesitated. Only a moment. But Rosalind noticed. Then he inclined his head politely. "Until we meet again, Lady Fairfax." The words were simple, yet something in his tone carried unmistakable promise. Rosalind watched them leave together. The gallery felt suddenly colder, quieter, more distant. She looked back at Turner's painting, the ship fighting impossible waves, the sky breaking apart above it. Her heart beat faster than it should, because she understood something now. Sebastian Hartwell was not avoiding her. He was watching. And from that day forward, he seemed to appear everywhere. At the opera, in Hyde Park, across crowded drawing rooms, always at a distance, always observing, never approaching. Yet his presence was unmistakable, like thunder rumbling beyond the horizon. Then one rainy afternoon, An invitation arrived, cream parchment, the ducal seal pressed into crimson wax. Lady Rosalind Fairfax is invited to take tea at a Greystone house. Wednesday at 4 o'clock, with appropriate chaperone. Aunt Agatha nearly fainted. "This is revenge," she whispered in horror. "He means to ruin you." Rosalind turned the letter slowly in her hands. The ink was unmistakably written by the Duke himself. Not a secretary, not a servant. Him. Her heart beat faster, and despite every warning in her mind, she smiled. "I will accept." Across London in his study at Greystone House, Sebastian stared into the fire, waiting. When the reply finally arrived, he read the single line twice, then a slow, dangerous smile appeared on his face. The storm had only just begun. Greystone House stood like a marble fortress on Park Lane. Tall iron gates, endless rows of windows. A residence built not merely for living, but for power. When Rosalind's carriage rolled to a halt before the grand steps that Wednesday afternoon, her stomach tightened. Beside her, Aunt Agatha clutched her reticule like a shield. "This is madness," the older woman whispered for the 10th time. "Absolute madness." Rosalind smoothed the sleeves of her dark blue gown. It was simple. Too simple for such a house, but it was the best she owned. "Then let us behave madly with dignity," she said quietly. The doors opened. The butler who greeted them looked carved from stone, silver-haired, perfectly upright, his expression entirely unreadable. "Lady Fairfax, Lady Agatha." They were led through halls scented faintly with beeswax and old roses. Portraits of Greystone ancestors watched from gilded frames. Men in military uniforms, women in heavy satin gowns, generations of power. Yet despite the grandeur, the house felt strangely empty, cold, as if laughter had not lived here in years. The butler opened a pair of glass doors. "The Duke awaits you in the winter garden." Sunlight poured through the high windows of the conservatory, illuminating rows of pale roses and carefully pruned orange trees. Sebastian Hartwell stood beside a small chess table, without his coat. His sleeves were rolled slightly at the forearms, revealing skin bronzed from riding rather than the pallor expected of aristocrats. The sight startled Rosalind. He looked less like a duke, more like a man. "Lady Fairfax," he said, bowing. "Lady Agatha." Aunt Agatha curtsied so deeply, Rosalind feared she might faint. Sebastian's expression softened faintly. "Lady Agatha," he said gently, "I asked the housekeeper to prepare ginger biscuits. I believe they are your favorites." The older woman blinked in surprise. How thoughtful. She hoped you might share the recipe. The bait was obvious, but perfectly polite. Within moments, the housekeeper appeared, inviting Aunt Agatha toward the adjoining tea room. Rosalind caught her aunt's anxious glance. "It is only tea," she said reassuringly. Agatha departed reluctantly. The moment the door closed behind her, silence fell. Heavy, private. Rosalind turned slowly. "That," she said calmly, "was manipulation worthy of a general." Sebastian's mouth twitched. "I prefer to think of it as diplomacy." He gestured toward the chessboard. "Please sit." She did. Her spine remained perfectly straight. Her gloved hands folded neatly in her lap. Sebastian remained standing for a moment before finally sitting across from her. Black chess pieces. White chess pieces. A battlefield of ivory and ebony. "Do you play, Lady Fairfax?" he asked. "Well enough to know when I am being placed on the board." This time he laughed. Soft, brief, but real. It transformed his face in a way that startled her. "You are remarkably perceptive," he said. "And you are remarkably direct," she replied. Sebastian leaned forward slightly. His storm-gray eyes held hers. "Then let us dispense with polite games." The air seemed to tighten. "Why did you challenge me that night?" Rosalind hesitated. "Because the truth was complicated. Because anger was easier than grief. My father invested in factories," she said quietly. Her fingers tightened around her wine glass. Sebastian said nothing. He discovered too late that the men managing them cared more for profit than people. Her throat tightened. He died believing he had helped build cruelty. The confession hung between them. Finally, Sebastian spoke. "The children were not 6. Rosalind blinked. "They were 10, he said. She stared at him. "That does not improve the situation." "No," Sebastian said quietly. "It does not." For the first time, he looked ashamed. "I delegated the oversight to others," he continued. "I signed papers without reading details. Then you chose not to see." "Yes." The honesty stunned her. Sebastian rested his hands on the chess table. "I have since changed the policies." Her breath caught. "Children under 12 are no longer employed. Those who work attend school 2 hours daily. Wages were raised." Rosalind stared at him. 3 other factories followed. "Why?" she asked softly. Sebastian held her gaze. Because you had the courage to say aloud what I refused to see. The words struck deeper than she expected. Rosalind felt something tighten painfully in her chest. You are telling me this because your defiance mattered. His voice softened. And because I want you to understand something. He leaned forward slightly. I am not the man you believed I was that night. Their eyes locked. The silence between them was no longer hostile. It was something else entirely, something far more dangerous. For the first time, Rosalind wondered if the feared Duke of Greystone had not summoned her to punish her at all, but to thank her, and that realization frightened her far more than his anger ever could. Because when Sebastian Hartwell looked at her like that, she felt the ground beneath her carefully ordered life begin to shift. The silence in the winter garden lingered long after Sebastian's confession. Rosalind studied him across the chessboard, trying to reconcile two men who seemed impossibly different. The Duke London feared, and the man who had just admitted fault without excuse. You changed the factories because of one confrontation? She asked quietly. Sebastian's fingers moved one of the chess pieces, a white knight sliding across the board. Not because of the confrontation. His gaze lifted to hers, because of the person who delivered it. Rosalind felt warmth rise unexpectedly to her cheeks. You give me too much credit. On the contrary, he said softly, I believe I give you exactly the amount you deserve. The remark was so sincere it unsettled her. She reached for a chess piece herself, moving a pawn almost absently. You are an unusual duke. Sebastian's mouth curved faintly. And you are an unusual lady. The quiet tension between them deepened. For a moment neither moved. The filtered afternoon sunlight through the glass ceiling painted pale gold across Rosalind's hair. Sebastian noticed, and could not seem to look away. Why were you at the orphanage last week? He asked suddenly. Rosalind blinked in surprise. You saw me? I make it my business to observe what interests me. The answer was disarmingly honest. Rosalind lowered her gaze briefly. My father left debts, she said carefully. There are few things I can offer society now besides time. And compassion, Sebastian added quietly. She looked up again. You saw that too? He did not answer directly. Instead, he leaned back in his chair. There was a child in your arms, he said slowly. An infant who refused to stop crying. Rosalind's fingers tightened around the chess piece she held. He had been abandoned 2 days earlier, she said softly. No mother, no name. Her voice softened further. He simply needed someone to hold him. Sebastian looked away toward the winter garden windows. Outside, London's gray sky had begun to darken with approaching rain. There was a time, he said quietly, when I held a child like that. Rosalind's breath stilled. Sebastian rarely spoke of his past. Society only whispered fragments. His wife, the tragedy, the years of mourning. My son was born dead, he continued calmly, though his voice carried a quiet fracture beneath the surface. My wife died 2 hours later. The words fell between them like shattered glass. Rosalind did not speak, did not offer hollow comfort. Instead, she reached across the chessboard, just far enough that her gloved fingers touched the back of his hand. The contact was light, careful, but unmistakable. I am sorry, she said simply. Sebastian looked down at her hand. 3 years. 3 years since anyone had touched him with kindness rather than obligation. Slowly, he turned his hand beneath hers, not fully holding it, just allowing the contact to remain. You see now, he murmured quietly, why storms interest me. Rosalind's voice was barely more than a whisper. Some storms never end. Sebastian's eyes lifted to hers again. No, he said. Sometimes they simply wait for someone brave enough to walk into them. The moment might have lasted longer, but footsteps approached the glass doors. Aunt Agatha's voice floated through the corridor. Oh my goodness, the housekeeper insists I take the recipe. Rosalind withdrew her hand quickly. Sebastian straightened in his chair, the aristocratic mask sliding smoothly back into place. When Agatha entered moments later, the chessboard had become their safe distance again. Polite conversation resumed. Poetry, books, weather. Yet when the visit ended and Rosalind prepared to leave, Sebastian followed them to the grand entrance hall. He paused as her carriage door opened. Lady Fairfax? She turned. For a moment neither spoke. Then he removed something from his pocket, a small white rose from the winter garden. He placed it gently in her gloved hand, hidden from Aunt Agatha's curious gaze. For courage, he said quietly. Rosalind looked down at the delicate flower, then back at him. Or perhaps, she replied softly, for the storm. Sebastian's eyes darkened. Yes, he murmured. Perhaps for the storm. and as her carriage disappeared into the grey London afternoon, both of them knew something had begun that neither reputation nor reason would easily stop. London noticed. At first it was subtle. A glance held a second too long at the opera, a duke's dark silhouette in a theatre box overlooking Lady Rosalind Fairfax's seat. A brief encounter along the gravel paths of Hyde Park, where a black stallion slowed just enough for its rider to acknowledge a lady walking beneath the elms. Nothing improper, nothing that could be openly criticized, yet society thrived on whispers, and whispers began to grow. Lady Rosalind felt the change first at a small musical in Mayfair. Conversation softened when she entered the room. Fans lifted. Eyes followed her. Not admiration, speculation. The rumor spread slowly like ink bleeding across parchment. The Duke of Greystone is watching her. Then one rainy afternoon a letter arrived. The parchment bore the unmistakable ducal seal of Greystone. Lady Fairfax is invited to take tea at Greystone House. Wednesday at 4 o'clock. With appropriate chaperone, Aunt Agatha nearly dropped the tray she was carrying. "This is revenge," she whispered. "He intends to humiliate you properly this time." Rosalind studied the elegant handwriting. It was not the hand of a secretary. Sebastian had written it himself. She could tell from the slight hesitation in the strokes, as though he had paused before certain words. "He would not invite witnesses if humiliation were his aim," she said quietly. "You do not know dukes," Agatha insisted. Rosalind folded the letter calmly. "No," she agreed. "But I believe I know this one." The invitation proved to be the beginning of something neither of them had expected. After that afternoon in the Winter Garden, Sebastian did not disappear again. He appeared everywhere, never intruding, never crossing the boundaries propriety demanded, but always there. At the opera, across the promenade in Hyde Park, in the bookshop on Piccadilly where Rosalind purchased volumes of poetry she could barely afford. Sometimes he merely nodded. Sometimes they exchanged a few quiet words beneath the polite surveillance of society. Yet each encounter carried the same strange energy, like thunder rolling closer with every passing day. And Rosalind began to notice something else. He was changing. The Duke, who had once been a distant, untouchable figure, now listened more than he spoke. He asked questions about the orphanage, about the reforms in his factories, about her father. Sometimes she even caught the faintest ghost of a smile. It transformed him, made him dangerously human. That was when the whispers turned poisonous. Lady Helena Montrose began circulating through drawing rooms with sweet concern in her voice. "Is it not curious," she would murmur delicately, "how often Lady Fairfax appears wherever Sebastian is?" Fans fluttered, brows lifted. "And the poor girl's father died in debt," Helena continued softly. "How tragic when desperation leads a young lady to bold strategies." Rosalind heard the rumors soon enough. Invitations began to disappear. Old acquaintances suddenly found reasons not to greet her. Even Aunt Agatha started watching her with worried eyes. "You must stop seeing him," the older woman pleaded one evening. "Society will destroy you." Rosalind knew she was right. Logic demanded distance, protection, self-preservation. And yet, when Sebastian appeared unexpectedly one morning in the small garden behind her modest house, Rosalind went down to meet him barefoot on the dew-soaked grass. The early mist curled through the roses. Sebastian stood waiting among the pale blossoms, hat in hand. "You should not be here," she said softly. "Nor should you." For a moment neither moved. "What are they saying about you?" he asked. "That I intend to trap a duke into marriage." His expression darkened. "And do you?" Rosalind laughed bitterly. "If I wished to trap a wealthy husband, Your Grace, I would have chosen a far less complicated target." Sebastian stepped closer, close enough that the morning mist seemed to vanish between them. "You did not choose this," he said quietly. "Neither did I." His voice softened further. "And yet here we are." Rosalind's heart began to race. "Then what are we doing?" Sebastian reached slowly into his coat. For a terrifying moment, she thought. But instead he withdrew a small velvet box. Dark green, worn with age. He opened it carefully. Inside rested a silver brooch shaped like a rose. "It belonged to my mother," he said quietly. "She wore it the day my father finally admitted he loved her." Rosalind's breath caught. "Why are you giving it to me?" Sebastian's eyes held hers with quiet intensity. "Because you make me want to try again." The words were barely louder than the whispering wind. "To live again," he added. "To feel again." His fingers brushed her cheek lightly. The first true touch between them, even if it terrifies me. Rosalind closed her eyes briefly. Tears burned unexpectedly behind her lashes. "Society will destroy us," she whispered. Sebastian's answer came without hesitation. Let it try. And as he pressed the silver rose gently into her trembling hand, neither of them realized that across London, the first truly cruel rumor had already begun to spread. The scandal did not explode. It spread, quietly, like poison in tea. Anonymous letters arrived first. Cheap paper, disguised handwriting. Lady Rosalind Fairfax is pursuing the Duke of Greystone to rescue herself from poverty. She has been seen alone with him repeatedly. The girl has no shame. By the end of the week, copies had reached nearly every drawing room in London. Matron after matron read the accusation over breakfast. Fans fluttered, eyebrows lifted. The story traveled faster than any carriage. Rosalind felt the consequences almost immediately. Invitations vanished. Ladies who once greeted her warmly suddenly discovered fascinating things in the opposite direction whenever she approached. Even acquaintances she had known since childhood offered only stiff nods. The humiliation was slow, precise, public. Aunt Agatha wept openly one evening. You must distance yourself from him, she pleaded. Your reputation cannot survive this. Rosalind knew the truth of it. A duke could weather scandal. A woman without wealth could not. Yet the worst pain was not the whispers. It was in Sebastian's silence. Days passed. Then a week. No visit, no letter, no defense. Nothing. Each morning Rosalind found herself glancing toward the street whenever horses passed the house. Each evening she told herself she had expected this. A duke had responsibilities, a name to protect. Eventually he would do the sensible thing. He would choose duty, and she would quietly disappear. Lady Helena Montrose arrived the following afternoon, dressed in pale pink silk inappropriate for a condolence visit. Poor dear, Helena said with gentle sympathy that barely concealed satisfaction. Sebastian has responsibilities, surely you understand. Rosalind met her gaze calmly. In that instant she knew. Helena had written the letters. The malice was too carefully arranged, the timing too perfect. But Rosalind said nothing, because Helena was not the true wound. Sebastian's silence was... That night Rosalind packed a single trunk. By morning she had left London for Aunt Agatha's quiet estate in Derbyshire. No farewell, no explanation. Only a small velvet box returned to Greystone House through a servant. Inside rested the silver rose brooch, along with a note written in trembling ink. 3 words. I am no coward. Sebastian received the box 7 days too late. He had spent those days surrounded by advisors, lawyers, and concerned relatives. All you must do is distance yourself, they insisted. Allow the scandal to fade. Protect the Greystone name. Sebastian had listened, not because he agreed, but because fear whispered poisonous doubts into his mind. What if loving Rosalind meant destroying her? What if society's cruelty crushed her spirit? What if history repeated itself and he lost someone he loved again? So he hesitated, just long enough to destroy everything. When the velvet box arrived, he knew immediately what it contained. His hands trembled as he opened it. The silver rose lay inside like a silent accusation, and beneath it, the note. 3 words. I am no coward. The meaning struck him like a blade. She believed he had abandoned her. Sebastian closed his eyes. For 3 years he had lived without feeling anything. Now the pain was unbearable. Prepare my horse, he ordered. Your Grace, the butler began carefully. There is a storm coming. I am aware. Sebastian took the brooch from the box, clenched it tightly in his hand, and for the first time since his wife's death, the Duke of Greystone ran towards something instead of away from it. Because if Rosalind Fairfax believed he had chosen fear, then he would ride through hell itself to prove her wrong. The storm over Derbyshire broke just after midnight. Rain lashed against the windows of Aunt Agatha's quiet country estate, wind rattling the shutters like impatient fists. Rosalind had not slept. Sleep had become impossible in recent weeks. Too many thoughts, too many memories, too many moments replaying in her mind. Sebastian's voice in the winter garden, the warmth of his hand, the quiet vulnerability in his eyes when he had spoken of his son. She stood by the window in her robe, watching lightning split the sky. And then she heard it. Hoofbeats, hard, urgent, through the storm. Her heart stopped. Another flash of lightning illuminated the drive. A lone rider staggered into the courtyard, horse lathered with foam, both rider and animal soaked by rain. Even from the window she knew that silhouette. Sebastian. Rosalind ran, down the stairs, across the hall, barefoot against cold marble. She opened the door before the next knock could fall. He stood there, utterly undone, hair plastered to his forehead, coat soaked through, mud splashed to his knees, and his storm-gray eyes burned with desperate determination. I cannot live, he said hoarsely, breath ragged, knowing you believe I chose fear over you. The rawness in his voice stunned her. "You hesitated," she said quietly. "Yes." The word came without defense, without excuse. Sebastian stepped inside, rain dripping from him onto the polished floor. "I hesitated because I was terrified," he continued. "Terrified of loving you and losing you the way I lost everything before." His voice broke slightly. "But I discovered something worse." Rosalind's heart pounded. "What?" "Living without trying." He reached inside his coat and withdrew a sealed envelope, carefully protected from the rain. "Read this." Her fingers trembled as she opened it. "Legal documents, property deeds, railway investments, bank accounts, all transferred to your Rosalind Fairfax are completely independent of marriage." Her breath caught. "Why would you—" "So you never again have to depend on any man," Sebastian said quietly. "Not even me." His gaze held hers. "If you reject me tonight, everything remains yours." He took a step closer. "Because you deserve to choose love freely, not out of fear, not out of necessity." Rosalind stared at him, at the soaked Duke standing in her aunt's foyer, the most powerful man in England offering her freedom before asking for her heart. Tears blurred her vision. "You fool," she whispered. Sebastian froze. "Stand up." He blinked. "Stand up," she repeated firmly. "If you are going to declare yourself Sebastian Hartwell, do it as my equal, not kneeling like a penitent duke." Slowly he rose. They stood face to face. Rosalind reached up and touched his rain-cold cheek. "You vowed never to love again. I broke that vow the moment you defied me in that ballroom. Society will destroy us. Let it try." Silence filled the hall. Then Rosalind whispered the words that changed everything. "Stay." Sebastian inhaled sharply. "Stay tonight," she continued softly. "Properly, in a guest room." A small smile touched his lips. "But stay." Relief flooded his expression like sunrise after endless night. "I will stay." And in that quiet country house, while the storm raged outside, something broken between them finally began to mend. 3 weeks later, London witnessed something it would talk about for decades. At Lady Ashford's grand ball, the doors opened, and Sebastian Hartwell entered with Rosalind Fairfax on his arm. She wore the silver rose brooch, the symbol of the Greystone family. Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Whispers erupted. Sebastian raised his cane once against the marble floor. The sound silenced the entire hall. "Allow me to clarify something," he said calmly. "Lady Rosalind Fairfax did not pursue me." His gaze swept the room. "I pursued her." Murmurs exploded. "For 3 years," he continued steadily, "you treated me with polite distance and empty respect." He looked down at Rosalind. She treated me with truth. Taking her hand, he lifted it for the room to see. "And if loving her offends your sensibilities—" His voice hardened with quiet authority. "Then I gladly offend them all." For a moment the room remained stunned. Then an elderly woman stepped forward. "Lady Pembroke, my daughter died in childbirth 20 years ago," she said softly. "I watched this man become a ghost after his wife died." She took Rosalind's hand. "Thank you for bringing him back to life." And just like that, the tide began to turn. Not everyone approved. Some never would. But enough people stepped forward with cautious smiles that the scandal softened, and for the first time since that fateful night in the ballroom, Rosalind felt the world shift, not against them, but slowly, toward them. The formal proposal came weeks later, not in a ballroom, not before society, but beneath the quiet stars in Greystone's garden. Sebastian knelt in the grass, holding a ring set with 3 emeralds the color of her eyes. "Rosalind Fairfax," he said softly, "you already know I love you." His voice trembled. "But now I ask properly." He opened the velvet box. "Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "1,000 times yes." Sebastian rose and kissed her. Not the restrained touch of polite society, but the kiss of 2 wounded hearts choosing courage over fear. And under the quiet stars of England, the Duke who had once feared love more than death finally understood something extraordinary. The woman who had dared to defy him had not enslaved his heart, she had freed it.